Hello and welcome to Fire Headlines, where we cover the hottest topics in fire service news. I'm your host, Samantha Didion. Our topic this week is the after-action report of the Maui wildfires that began in August of 2023. This AAR was produced by the Western Fire Chiefs Association and published on April 18, 2024. Joining me on the panel to discuss this topic is Chief Bob Roper, our Senior Policy Advisor and lead content author for the AAR. Also joining us is Chief Kim Zagaris, our Senior Operations Advisor and subject matter expert for the AAR. Thank you both for joining me today. I'm really excited to hear your insights, as I'm sure our listeners are as well. So Chief Roper, I want to give my first question to you. Being the lead author for this report, where do you begin, and what was your experience while writing this AAR?
It really involves a lot of interviews. Let me back up a little bit and just talk about why the AAR was even done. And we were contacted by the Maui Fire Department, the fire chief, Brad Ventura, about doing the after-action review. And the after-action reviews are really a learning experience. It's not a fault-finding venture. In this case, the Attorney General's office is looking at more pointed questions on specific aspects, but the Western Fire Chiefs took this project on not to find any fault, but to identify what worked, what could be done better for next time, because the people in Hawaii know that there will be a next time. So we were invited to come over, and both Chief Zagaris and myself, we spent 2 weeks in early December, and we did over 200 interviews. And we did people inside the organization and people outside of the organization to learn firsthand what did they experience. Because this was a special type of incident where it wasn't just the Lahaina large fire that everybody was focused on. The real emphasis is they had 4 fires happening at the same time. And so you can only imagine that an organization that has that many incidents happening at one time, you're on an island, all you have is the resources that are on your island. How do you deal with this type? So this was the largest complex of incidents that they ever had on the island of Maui. And the one thing we want to make sure that most people realize is that it is an island, but you could take the lessons learned in this after-action review and apply them to anywhere in the continental U.S., because there's a few items in the recommendations that are germane to the island, but everything else could happen anywhere.
Right, and we're actually going to talk about that a little bit more in this episode. But first, I'd like to bring Chief Zagaris into the conversation. Chief, can you talk to us about the interviews? What was the spirit of the people in Maui during your visit?
So most of the folks we spoke with, where we try to come from, was what did they see and feel, leading up to the events? Because, they knew they had a hurricane that was off the coast. Then they got the red flag warnings. And so what we were trying to get from them is, how were they preparing for the event? And then, once their event started, what did they do from there? And as I think Chief Roper has already indicated, there was a series of fires. They had 4 main fires. The first one started up country by Kailua, right around midnight on the 8th. And they had a second fire up country. They had a couple smaller little fires that, were actually put out pretty easily during the course of that day when the winds were really blowing pretty heavily. And most people don't really realize that you've been to Maui, you go, well, it's usually pretty breezy there. but it's actually, a lot more windy there in Maui than on the other islands. And while we say that, 20, 30 mile an hour winds are pretty common for them. But now you're talking about winds at, 60, 70, 80 miles an hour with gusts. And so that played a big part in what happened. And as the day went on, it wasn't until later that afternoon that the real devastating fire there in Lahaina started that really, I think, most people focused their attention on. They had their on-duty shift that was on shift from the 7th and went into the 8th and went from there. But I mean, things transitioned. And as the first fire up there in Kailua started, they were bringing in additional staff. They were coordinating with the resources they had to bring on additional apparatus and equipment and personnel. And that went on throughout the day leading up to, the fire there in Lahaina. And I think it's pretty amazing. Not only were they utilizing Maui Fire Department, but they brought in a number of contractors as well to assist them as the event continued to escalate. And, really hard for most people, but if you're on an island and it's not like you got a bridge to get to one of the other islands, there's 10 stations on Maui. You got your normal staffing that day. They did some upstaffing as the fires picked up. They kept trying to put out additional resources until they really had nothing additional out there. I mean, they've got stories of some of their personnel using their own vehicles, to get them from point A to point B, doing some rescues. I mean, it's quite an experience. And I think probably more than anything, the first couple fires were traditional wildland fires that moved into some structures. As some of the fires progressed, they continue to run into some interface areas where, trying to protect people's homes, trying to contain the fire where they could, having enough water. Later in that day when Lahaina fire broke out, and eventually they had water when they first started, but quickly lost power, lost communications with at least cellular. They were lucky to keep up their mobile radio capability, but I think it was an interesting event. I've been kind of interested since this report's been released, and you read some people's comments on blogs, and some very heroic actions by Maui Fire Department, their public safety folks, even law enforcement that occurred out there. While we were focused on the public safety side of the house, you can imagine there's plenty of civilian rescues that probably went on. Some days where we got some really good information, and I'd tell you there were days that you listen to the staff and just some very heartbreaking type situations that we've experienced in our career, but never easy. We've watched some folks get choked up. A variety of emotions ran through that staff, and we did 200 plus interviews. We didn't get them all, and I mean it's pretty amazing.
I think when we deal with an after-action review on a major incident like this, I think the things that really stick to you is the emotional nature of an incident. When you have firefighters working 36 to 48 hours straight because they didn't have any other resources. As they're doing that, firefighters are used to making a big difference, putting out fires. And when you get in a situation like this, where Mother Nature is bigger than you are, and you can't make that big difference, and you have to kind of change your tactics from the fire suppression containing the fire to now we just have to focus on life safety. It was those stories about life safety, not only the stories about, the firefighters who got burnt and who lost a fire engine, those type of stories you really resonate with. But it was also the speed upon which the homes burnt in the neighborhoods and the people who were walking around like zombies because they were disorientated because it was daytime, but the smoke was so bad it looked like it was nighttime. And the people that were in the water just trying to survive. Those are stories out of the ordinary that firefighters don't usually get. And those are the ones that when you sit down with people and do the interviews that Chief Zagaris and I did, those are the ones that we will remember for a long time because of the emotional nature, the dedication, and for the 101 lives lost and the injuries that occurred.
Maui, the islands themselves, but in particular Maui, and you could probably say the same about Kauai or even the Big Island, but, those aren't big populations. Multi-generation families born, grew up there, still there. A lot of these firefighters lost their homes as well, knew a lot of the victims, lost loved ones. And I think you think about it, wow, they're continuing to put themselves out there to suppress the fire, do the rescues, all the things they needed to do. And I think it becomes very, very hard. It's going to be with them for quite some time. So it'll be interesting to look at, between now and the next 20 plus years, how some of these firefighters, deal with this particular event, probably more so than anything with the 101 lives lost, because of some early retirements, other issues. Community's got to, rebound as well. Some of the firefighters we talked to, some were having a harder time than others, dealing with the loss of homes, and some were living with relatives, others weren't. I mean, it's a very different time than some of our fires that we're used to dealing with here in the mainland, I think, overall.
The other thing that really made an impact was when we got there, as we learned more and more about Maui Fire Department and their history, is this was the largest fire or series of incidents that they've ever had in their history on the island. Okay, so people were taxed. But on top of that, behind the scenes, they also, the prior year, had a line of duty death that they had to deal with. Okay, and so they had a near miss, and almost another line of duty incident happened here with the injury with the captain and so forth. And so it really brought forth the value and the work that Maui Fire has done with their mental health recovery programs. That alone is what's really needed during these type of adverse situations so that firefighters can recover emotionally, mentally, and so forth, and work with even their own families. Because like Chief Zagaris said, there was quite a few people that were lost their homes. When at the time of our interview, we had one gentleman who lives there in Lahaina that was assigned over on Lanai on the island over there, but he was home and he actually took and was doing some rescues and so forth. He didn't lose his home, but they lost the infrastructure for water, power, and so forth. So they were another story that they had to move in with relatives during the time that we're doing our interview. We hope that they finally got their utilities restored, but that whole area of Lahaina was adversely affected.
It was, and that's going to be a long road to recovery there, especially considering, it's an island that you have to ship all of the new material in to rebuild. Even thinking about the videos that were on the news in August when this was happening, it's really difficult to comprehend the reality of it and what those people experienced. This concludes part 1 of the Maui After Action Report. Please tune in next week to hear part 2, where we dive into the takeaways of the AAR and where Maui Fire stands for the 2024 fire season. Thank you to our listeners for tuning in. A link to the After Action Report can be found in the show notes of this episode. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe and follow us on social media. If you have a question for the panel, please reach out to us at fireheadlines@wfca.com and let us know what's on your mind. We'll see you back here next week for more Fire Headlines.